Hi guys. So my name is Paramjeet Mishra, and I just had my XIMB HRM interview. So the interview just ended like 15 minutes ago. So basically, I've put up this video to help you guys understand what the interview at XIMB for HRM is like, and just to give you a general idea. Many of you may have your interviews lined up since we know this is the time when interviews are being conducted. So yeah, let's get right into it. So XIMB basically accepts CAT, XAT, and NMAT scores. I applied through my CAT score. I got a call because my score was above 90. Now, the interview time that was given to me was 10:30, but the interview started at about 10:15 itself. So make sure that you definitely join 45 minutes at least prior to the time given to you in your mail. That's very important. Otherwise, if they start earlier, you'll miss out on a lot. So when the room was connected, there were basically three panelists. I prepared notes for you to help you understand what exactly were the questions asked, the kind of questions based on your background. So my background is basically I've done my economics honors from CVS Ranchi. Now, there were three panelists, like I mentioned, one male, two females. The first question that was asked to me was that I did my graduation back a couple of years back, and what have I been doing since? So basically, I had a gap year, and as I'm sure a lot of you do. So you have to have an answer prepared as to what exactly were you doing in that gap year. So I gave my answer. The next question was, what was my XAT score? And do I have calls from XIMB, BM, and XLRI? To which I told them that I actually missed the call for BM just by 2 percentile. Now, this is where it gets interesting because, like I mentioned, I have an economics background. So the questions were heavily, heavily inclined on economics. And as I'm sure you'll see what happened next. So the panelist was like, you want to get into the HR domain, but before that, let's see how well versed you are in your own subject. And since it has been a while since you graduated, I'm hoping you do know the answers. To which I said, I hope the same, sir. So the first question he asked me, and this is for people from economics background, they'll understand it a bit better. The question was, what is oligopoly? So for those of you who don't know, oligopoly is basically a market situation where a couple of firms are there, as opposed to a monopoly or perfect competition. The next question was, what is the difference between gross national product and net national product? Which the answer to which is basically depreciation. After that, he asked me that apart from Indian Railways, give me an example of a monopoly which is enjoying its complete powers. So the most prominent example of a monopoly is Indian Railways itself, in our country, that is. But since he already bought Indian Railways, I had to think of one. I tried really hard, but I couldn't come up with that. So I come up with one. So I was honest and I told him that I don't know the answer to this. And he was like, that's fine. And he moved on to the next question. The next question was, give me an example of Giffen goods. Now, again, Giffen goods is something that is a primary example of law of demand. So I gave the example, which was bread, and how it came up in the 1700s when the bread was the only commodity that people could consume. So that was another question that he asked. After that, he moved on to ask me one-liner questions like, who is the father of economics? Adam Smith. Who is the father of modern economics? Then he asked me, where do you put our own Amartya Sen in the lobby of these economists? So these were all the questions exclusively from economics itself. So the point I'm trying to make here is that make sure you're very well versed in the subjects you did in your graduation because a lot of questions will be asked. And I mean, you have to know. If you don't, then who will, right? After that, the next question he asked me, this is just the one panelist going on. He asked me, why do you want to do HR? And you have gap years, so how do you justify it? Are you looking for a placement? To which I answered whatever my answers were. Then he asked me, your scores are depleting. So I went from 90 percentile, 92 percentile in 10th, and my scores were depleting. Like my profile is 976. So I gave a justification for that as to how I was heavily inclined in sports. I was the basketball captain and everything, and that took a toll on my studies. So I justified that to him, and I'm hoping he was, satisfied with my answer. This is when the next panelist came in, the female, like I mentioned, and the first question she asked me was like, I did pursue a master's course, a distance course. So she asked me why did I not continue that, to which I gave my reason, and she was convinced. The next question she asked me, again, this is based on the subject itself. So again, stressing it one more time, make sure you're very well versed in your subjects. Like you have to be thorough because they can ask you anything and they have a right to do that. So the question was, it was a hypothetical situation. Like there's a mall, and in that mall, there's an ice cream shop, which is selling ice creams at half the price of what it is being sold at outside, like in the marketplace. So how does the law of demand apply here? What will be the sales of that mall? To which I obviously said there's an inverse relation. So the demand at the mall will be twice as opposed to the one in the marketplace. Then she brings in a very interesting situation as to suppose you're tempted by that market price of the mall or mall price of the ice cream and you end up buying it, but then you discover that the taste is very bad. So how do you think that will affect the demand of that commodity? So obviously this is a case where the law of demand is being negated because even though the price is less, the demand will not be as much because the quality is very bad. So I mentioned that there's a clause called ceteris paribus, where every other situation has to be constant for the law of demand to work. So I gave the answer, and I'm pretty sure she was convinced. Again, this was like I mentioned, a course specific subject or whatever you've done in your undergraduation. Now this is when the third panelist came in, and she asked me a question related to general knowledge, which was who is the current governor of Jharkhand, which I gave the answer. And then she asked me who was the previous governor, to which also I gave the correct answer because I know it was Ramesh Wise. But then she was like, no, 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 like the governor of Jharkhand became the president of India recently. I was like, no, ma'am, actually, Draupadi Murmu was the previous governor of Jharkhand, to which she agreed. Yeah, I was talking about Draupadi Murmu. Then the last question from the third panelist was, give me two qualities of yours as to why we should hire you. To which I explained whatever my strengths are. So make sure you have that lined up because you have to convince them as to what is it about you that would make them want to hire you. After this was done, this was basically the last question. The first panelist came in again and he told me that everything is fine, your communication is good, you do fit the domain as well, you have a good grasp on your own subject, but the gap years can be a problem. So again, this is for you people who have gap years like me. You need to have a good justification for it. I mean, I do. I'm pretty sure I did. The one mistake that I made was I did not mention that in the work experience column. So this can be a good takeaway for you. For those of you who have gap years, if you've done anything in those gap years, make sure you mention that in the work experience column. I was not aware. I thought that only the proper work experience can be mentioned there. If you've done freelancing, if you've been part of any NGOs, any club like Toastmasters International, I was the vice president membership there. Make sure you mention it because they definitely evaluate it. As what happens in the CAT form is that unless you have a proper work experience from a proper organization, they only consider that. But that clearly is not the case with XIMB because they consider other freelancing, NGO work, other organization works as well. So you have to put it up there because they want to see what you've done with your gap year. So that was the one mistake I made. Make sure you don't make that mistake. You put it up there. And in the end, the review from all the panelists were good. Basically, they were happy, I think would be the safe word to use here. And make sure you are very well versed in your own subject because there will be a lot of questions from that. They'll grill you on that. And if you have gap years, you need to have good justification for it. And yeah, so like I mentioned, XIMB accepts CAT score, XAT score, XGMT, and MAT, and you can apply on whichever is your best score. And if you have any questions, ping them in the comments. I'll answer as many as I can. And yeah, all the best to any of you who have your interviews lined up. And hopefully, this video of mine will help you get an idea of what an HR interview at XIMB is like. Thank you so much. Bye bye.